Thanks so much for tuning in again to Scope Notes, your gastroenterology-focused medical education podcast created by learners for learners. For any new listeners, I'm your co-host, Huachi Lee, current first-year internal medicine resident at the University of Toronto in Canada, working together with my co-host, Mo Bashiri, fifth-year gastroenterology fellow and chief resident, also at the University of Toronto. Our amazing faculty advisor is Dr. Parul Tandon, a staff gastroenterologist and clinician scientist in inflammatory bowel diseases at the University Health Network/Sinai Health in Toronto. With Scope Notes, you can look forward to monthly episodes covering all things GI, including practice guidelines, research reviews, and special career topics. We'll be specifically featuring prominent gastroenterology staff from the University of Toronto and across Canada for their expert opinions. So come join us from your favorite podcast streaming app. We'd also like to extend a huge thank you to the Division of Gastroenterology and Hepatology at the University of Toronto for their generous support of this podcast. With all of that being said, let's move on to our episode. Today will be part 1 of 4 in a very exciting mini-series featuring new faculty in the Division of Gastroenterology and Hepatology at the University of Toronto. We'll be releasing the next 3 parts over the course of this month. Today, we're joined by our wonderful podcast supervisor, Dr. Parul Tandon himself. Dr. Tandon, thanks so much for joining us on today's Scope Notes episode. To get us started, could you share with our listeners a bit more about yourself and your training background?
Yeah, no, thanks for having me for this great initiative. Congratulations on the podcast and establishing it, and I'm excited to see what content comes in the near future. So I'm Parul Tandon. I'm a gastroenterologist at the University Health Network and Sinai Health. I have a clinical and research interest in inflammatory bowel diseases. My journey has been very interesting, and it was a path that I never expected. I did my medical school at Michigan State University. I finished med school in 2015, and I was lucky enough to complete my internal medicine residency at the University of Ottawa from 2015 to 2018, where I met some of my most important mentors that I've had throughout my journey, particularly Dr. Jeff McCurdy, where I grew interested in GI research and inflammatory bowel diseases research. That sparked my interest, and I applied for gastroenterology and was lucky enough to return home to Toronto, where I completed my adult gastroenterology residency from 2018 to 2020. And then, during my gastroenterology residency, met more mentors, networked, and created a close relationship with the Sinai IBD group in Toronto, and was fortunate enough to be accepted to complete an inflammatory bowel diseases fellowship from 2020 to 2022. And along the way, learned that I wanted to do research. I wanted to do important research that would impact patients' lives, but I didn't have the clinical nor the expertise or knowledge to do high quality research. So I joined the Masters of Epidemiology at the Institute of Public Health Policy and Management at University of Toronto. And then transferred to the PhD, where I completed a PhD in clinical epidemiology, looking at health services utilization of women with IBD during pregnancy. And that led me to my journey now, where I've established my practice at the University Health Network.
Thanks so much for sharing. I think it's really interesting to hear about the paths that different people take and the unexpected turns that you might experience. Sounds like mentorship was also a big part of your career so far. You've trained in both Ottawa and Toronto, like you mentioned, and recently completed the PhD. How have these experiences shaped your career and practice thus far?
If you asked me 15 years ago, whether I would have expected to go to Ottawa, return home to Toronto, I would have said, it wasn't part of my plan. My journey took me to the US for medical training, figured I'd stay in the US. And so, what I've learned visiting different centers, different sites in various parts of my training is that it's really helped me understand different ways to practice medicine. It's allowed me to experience different aspects of clinical medicine, research medicine, as well as pure epidemiological research from different viewpoints. I've met fantastic mentors. My network has grown significantly, which, I never really appreciated when I was a trainee, but now I appreciate wholeheartedly that because I trained in a variety of centers, I've created this very strong network, sort of my family, that I can reach out to for, clinical advice, life advice, research advice, and also to collaborate on various research projects. So, I think really having the fortunate luck to train in different sites has really allowed me to build my program now at the University of Toronto.
Yes, having that family or network, like you said, is really important and segues slightly into our next question. But what drew you to working at the University of Toronto and what have you enjoyed the most so far?
So I know it's cliche, but it was always my dream when I was a little kid to work at the University of Toronto, and I'm lucky enough to be living my dream. But really, the University of Toronto is, obviously a world-renowned clinical and research university. It offers so much opportunity. Everything is quote unquote in-house, right? We have world experts in whatever you can imagine, in whatever field of medicine, whatever field of research, all within the walls of the University of Toronto. So as a junior researcher and junior clinician, the world is right at my doorstep. And, having the ability to work with mentors and senior experts and world-renowned leaders in a variety of fields, has allowed me to really understand, where my program lacks, where I can count on people that are around me to help enrich that program to ultimately improve patients' lives. And I've enjoyed the collegial nature of the University of Toronto. Everybody wants to help each other out. It's a big family. And I think that, you don't find many big centers that function like that. So really, I think that the University of Toronto is a premier place to work. It doesn't feel like work. It feels like this is part of my life. And, I think that's what the environment that's cultivated around me by everybody working alongside me.
Yeah, I think a lot of us at U of T share the same cliched sentiments. And you mentioned your program a couple of times. Can you tell us a bit more about the specific program you're working on in Toronto?
Yeah, no, for sure. So at the University Health Network, we've developed the Inflammatory Bowel Diseases Clinical and Research Program, established September 2023. It's staffed by our senior mentor, Dr. Maria Sino, and one of my colleagues, Dr. Alexis Hassan. We provide multidisciplinary inflammatory bowel diseases care to patients at the University Health Network, work very closely with our colleagues in dermatology and rheumatology to provide that care. And then for my specific research program, I'm very interested in how to deliver culturally appropriate care to those that consider themselves as racial ethnic minorities and those that are new to our country. So immigrants, for example. IBD is a chronic disease. It impacts everybody very differently. Everybody lives a story of inflammatory bowel disease, and that story may be different. And there may be more hardships when you travel to a new healthcare setting, a new society where, you bring your culture with you, your religion with you, and everything is foreign. So our program aims to improve the delivery of standardized and equitable care to all living with IBD, particularly those of racial ethnic minorities, as well as those that are immigrating to our country.
Thank you. I heard you were working on a recent research project on that as well, I think, with Dr. Vivian Huang.
Yeah, where specifically Dr. Vivian Wong was one of my mentors, my friend and my colleague. She's interested in preconception and pregnancy care and inflammatory bowel diseases. And we're looking at, how to provide adequate care from a GI perspective during pregnancy to a variety of different cultures, because we know that, especially during a high risk period, a very vulnerable period like pregnancy, people want their healthcare providers to recognize cultural differences, provide culturally appropriate care. And we're trying to understand that from a patient perspective so we can improve how we deliver care to our patients.
Yeah, it's very interesting for sure. And we talked a bit about the current status of your program, but where do you see your program in the next 5 years?
Yeah, no, thank you. So in the next 5 years, I'm hoping we've made headway in determining where the deficiencies are in the current way we deliver care to our patients. And the hope is that we have a dedicated program that aims to provide that equitable, culturally appropriate care to different racial and ethnic minorities. The one that I'm interested in is, and to begin with, is providing care to South Asian people living with inflammatory bowel diseases, where we see IBD exponentially rising in those populations. And so, for example, I hope that we can establish a program where we provide care to South Asians living with IBD, perhaps in their own language, perhaps with people they want to connect with. And so that's where I see our current research improving care, hopefully within the next 5 to 10 years.
I think that's really important, not to be biased as an immigrant myself. And to end off, do you have any advice for our listeners who are hoping to pursue gastroenterology and or IBD?
Yeah, no, I think my advice is be flexible. A lot of doors will open. We just need to walk through those doors. And sometimes we tunnel vision into our dreams and that this is where we want to work. This is what we want to practice. And this is what field, we wish to see ourselves in. But sometimes, life has different plans. It was those doors that I never planned to walk through that really led to who I am today as a person, as a clinician, as a researcher. So my number one advice to people is be flexible. Be flexible to experience new environments, new mentors, new networks, because you never know what door will lead you to your final destination, which friends you'll make along the way, which colleagues will stick with you, which mentors will, shape your career. So be flexible, be ready to go where path takes you, and that path will never be what you expect it to be, but that path you'll look back and you'll consider yourself lucky to have walked that journey.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tandon, for a very engaging conversation. That's it for our episode today. Thanks so much to our listeners for tuning in. Join us again next week for part 2 of our new faculty miniseries. Follow us on social media for the latest updates at Scope Notes GI on X, formerly Twitter, and Instagram. If you have any feedback or just want to say hi, you can reach the team at scopenotesgi@gmail.com and check out our website at www.scopenotesgi.com.